Hi, good day, everyone. And we are now in the second session or second day of our research writing write shop. So allow me to present my material to everyone. So for this session, in session three, we'll talk about the roadmap to research, designing your methodology. So I want to begin our discussion on three important terminologies. First is what you call ontology. And the ontology refers to the reality. So ontology answers the question, what exists in the human world we can acquire knowledge about? And epistemology is how do we create knowledge? And this is anchored on theory. And epistemology can be grounded on four things. First is the context of constructionism, wherein the meaning created from interplay between the subject and subject. It would be subject construct reality to an object. The second is what you call objectivism, wherein the meaning exists within an object, meaning to say that an objective reality exists in an object independent of the subject. And the third is what you call subjectivism, wherein the meaning exists as multiple, intangible mental construction, meaning to say that there is no reality beyond subjects. And finally is authority. So authority can be taken from your parents, your state, your boss. It could be religion. What is your faith? What is your beliefs? Your standard and morals, your tradition, no? Like the way we do things, like folkway, cultural patterns, or what we know how we behave in certain situation. So the epistemology or the theory is important in order for us to have some sort of framework later on. And this framework is important for us to decide what kind of methodological approach and methods we'll be using later on in our study or in our proposal. So the third session will focus on methodology because remember in a proposal, we are done with introduction, which was our first session. Second session is on literature review, the importance of having a blueprint on writing properly our literature review. And third is methods. So methodology or methods refers to or it describes how a sample and they have been selected. It also includes certain rules of analysis and rules of verification and validation. It also includes deductive reasoning, approximation, statistical analysis, and simulation. And in this section, we describe the experiment, your scenario, your setup, your context. It also covers some information where you speak about the procedure, but it should not include information that are listed in steps form. It also include materials and method that are needed to be written either in past tense form because we are assuming that you have conducted this particular paper. But if it's a proposal, obviously it's in the future tense. So for this particular session, you will be doing certain tasks. So in the materials and method section of an article, you will include introduction, the types of research, research design, research setting and locale, participants of the study. You will also include sample size and sampling technique, institutional ethics review, data collection, and data analysis. I will discuss each of them thoroughly in a little while. So I want to begin with the types of research. So there are three major types of research. We have quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method. Let me begin first by discussing what quantitative research is all about. Quantitative research involves the collection and analysis of numerical data to identify certain patterns like test hypothesis and even make prediction. It is often used to measure variables or quantify certain relationships and generalize findings from a sample to a population. So if you're thinking of quantitative research, you might ask, what and how do we get the data? So data are being collected through structured methods such as surveys, experiments, and questionnaire. What about the type of data? You are going to deal with numerical data, and it involves statistics, percentages, and measurements. But what about the analysis? You use statistical analysis in order to identify certain trends, certain correlation, or cause and effect relationship. So whenever you are thinking or doing quantitative research, your main goal is to quantify variables and even test hypotheses in a way that allows for you to generalize to a larger population. For example, a study measuring the effects of different teaching methods on student test scores a large sample of students. So that's an example of quantitative research. Second is what you call qualitative research. Qualitative research is used to explore and understand the meaning individuals or groups ascribe to a social or human problem. It involves collecting non-numerical data and focuses on understanding concepts, experiences, or social contexts. So what are the key characteristics of qualitative research? Number one, in the area of data collection, we are dealing with unstructured and semi-structured methods like interviews, focus group discussion, observations, and content analysis. So what are the data types? In qualitative research, you are dealing with non-numerical data. It means that you're dealing with words, images, and even videos. The method of analysis could be thematic analysis, narrative analysis, or content analysis to identify patterns, themes, and even insights. So, for example, if your goal or objective is to gain a deep understanding of underlying reasons and opinion and motivation, how can we use qualitative research? So, an example of that would be an in-depth study of how patients experience and cope with chronic illness based on interviews and personal narratives. By the way, the examples of the different types of quantitative research and qualitative research are also projected on the screen or on my monitor. So under experimental research or quantitative research, under experimental research, we include true experimental, quasi-experimental, and single subject. But for non-experimental quantitative research, it includes descriptive, comparative, correlational, survey, and ex post facto. Under qualitative, it can be categorized into two. It could be interactive, which includes ethnographic, phenomenology, case study, grounded theory, and critical studies. When you talk about interactive, it involves participants, and the role of participants is crucial in understanding patterns or themes later on. But when you talk about non-interactive, you are dealing with either secondary data or primary data that are not dealing with people. It could be based from historical facts, or it could be based on material that can be read, no, or can be analyzed. And this includes content analysis and historical analysis. Third type of research is called mixed methods. Mixed method research combines both quantitative and qualitative research approaches in a single study to provide a more comprehensive understanding of the research problem. It leverages the strengths of both methods to answer research questions that cannot be fully addressed by either qualitative or quantitative research alone. So what are the key characteristics of mixed method? Number one, in the area of data collection, it uses both quantitative, example of that is survey or experiment, and qualitative includes interview, focus group discussion in data collection methods. In the area of data integration, there should be an integration of quantitative and qualitative data that can occur during the data collection, or it could be on the analysis or interpretation phases. In the area of analysis, It combines statistical analysis with thematic analysis to provide both numerical insights and detailed context. So the main objective of mixed method is to provide a more complete understanding of a research problem by integrating different types of data. So in a nutshell, how do we compare the three? So quantitative research is best for testing theories or hypotheses, generalizing findings to a broader population and identifying relationship between variables. Qualitative research is ideal for exploring complex phenomena, understanding context, and gaining in-depth insights into participants' experiences. And mixed method is a balanced approach. It provides both the numerical strength of the quantitative research and the depth of the qualitative research, allowing for a more comprehensive exploration of the research question. So, I am done with an overview of these three major types of research. Obviously, when you are writing a proposal, you need to decide whether you are doing quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method. So let me start with quantitative research method. So what are the major concepts that we need to understand? I'll be discussing and rooting my first discussion on quantitative on Alaga and Gunderson 2002's definition of quantitative research. And according to them, quantitative research is explaining phenomena by collecting numerical data that are analyzed using mathematically based methods. So let's digest some of the words that are highlighted in the definition of Aliaga and Gunderson. So the first element is explaining a phenomena or phenomenon. This is the key element of all research, be it in quantitative or qualitative research. When we set out certain things or when we set out a research, or when we conduct research, we are always looking to explain something. And in education, for example, this could be questions like, why do teachers leave teaching? What factors influence students' achievement, so on and so forth. The specificity of quantitative research lies in the next part of the definition. In quantitative research, we collect numerical data. And this is closely connected to the final part of our definition, wherein analysis using mathematical based method. In order to be able to use mathematically based method, our data have to be in numerical form. And this is not the case for qualitative research. So these are the sample questions that we can arrive or do when we are making quantitative research. For example, how many males get a first-class degree at university compared to females? What percentage of teachers and school leaders belong to ethnic minority groups? Or has pupil achievement in mathematics improved in our school district over time? So qualitative data are not necessarily or usually numerical in nature and therefore cannot be analyzed using statistics. Therefore, because quantitative research is essentially about collecting numerical data to explain a particular phenomenon, a particular question or questions seem immediately suited to being answered using quantitative methods. And here are some of the examples. How many males? What are the percentage? And as pupil achievements in mathematics improve in our school district over time. So let's continue by looking at the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. So when you talk about qualitative research, we want to understand and even interpret human perspective. It is less generalizable to population. It is rich in terms of description. We are focusing on the depth. A small sample is fine in qualitative, and selection of procedure to establish trust in finding should be included. But in quantitative, comparison or correlation of population attributes is very important. Our goal is to generalize the population. We are focusing on numerical summaries. Rather than the depth, we want the breadth. And we are focusing on the large sample. And it is being prescribed process to establish validity and liability. Now, after discussing a thorough definition of quantitative research, we might be wondering when to use quantitative research. So the question is, when do we use quantitative methods? So there are actually four main types of questions or question that quantitative research is particularly suited to find an answer to. And it includes the following. Number one, if you want a quantitative answer, like for example, how many mathematics teachers do we need and how many have we got in our school district? So if that is the kind of question that we need to answer, we will be needing or using quantitative research to answer this kind of question because this question is so obvious. Qualitative research, the numerical method will obviously not provide us with the numerical answer that we want. Another numerical change are the numbers of students in our university rising or failing. Is achievement going up or down? So we should not do a quantitative study to find it out. What else? Number three, to explain a phenomenon, what factors predict the recruitment of mathematics teachers and what factors are related to changes in the students' achievement over time. So there are actually many statistical techniques that have been developed to allow us to predict score in one factor or variable, like for example, teacher recruitment from score on one or more than other factor or variables. Like for example of that is unemployment rates, the pay condition, and the like. And another example is testing of hypotheses. Is there a relationship between pupils' achievement and their self-esteem and social background? So obviously, we could look at the theory and come up with a hypothesis that lower social class background leads to low self-esteem, which could in turn be related to low achievement. And using quantitative research, we can try and even test this kind of model. So the first two questions will give us an understanding of a descriptive research. And the last two questions or questions 3 and 4 would lead us into inferential research or inferential statistics or inferential type of quantitative research. So when you talk about descriptive, we are merely trying to describe the situation. But when you are talking about inferential, we are trying to explain something rather than just being or just describing it. So as mentioned previously, while quantitative methods are good at answering these four types of question, there are other types of question that are not well suited to quantitative methods. So what are those types of questions that are not suited for a quantitative method? So first, wanting to explore a problem in depth. So most probably quantitative research method is good at providing information in breadth from a large number of units. But when we want to explore a problem or concept in depth, quantitative methods are too shallow. To really get under the skin of a phenomenon, we will be needing to go for an ethnographic methods, interviews, in-depth case study, and other qualitative techniques. Second, develop hypotheses and theories. We have learned that quantitative research is well suited for testing of theories and hypotheses. The hypothesis or hypothesis to be tested may come from a review of literature or theory, but could also be developed using exploratory qualitative research. Third, if issues to be studied are particularly complex. So if issues to be studied are particularly complex, an in-depth qualitative study, like for example, a case study, is more likely to pick up on this than quantitative study. This is partly because there is a limit of how many variables can be looked in one quantitative study, and partly because in quantitative research, it is the researcher who defines the variable to be studied. In qualitative research, unexpected variables may emerge. Fourth is looking at the meaning of particular events or circumstances. Finally, when quantitative methods are better at looking at cause and effect, like for example, causality, qualitative methods are more suited at looking at the meaning of a particular events or circumstances. Another thing that you need to remember when you're talking about quantitative research is the units and variables. So when we collect data in quantitative, like for example, quantitative educational research, we have to collect them from someone to something. So a quantitative research or researchers will design studies that will allow us to test these hypotheses. So for example, the school or thing, like a school that we collect from data, or it could be any characteristics of a unit that we are interested in and we want to collect it. Like for example, of that is gender, age, or self-esteem. And these are relevant and we can use statistical techniques in order to describe whether or not to reject provisionally accept the hypothesis. And accepting this hypothesis, like for example, a new data may emerge, cause it to either reject it later or not. So a hypothesis is a tentative explanation that accounts for a set of facts that can be tested to further investigate a particular phenomenon or a topic or variable. So after identifying the major type, no? For example, quanti, if that is your research, the major type of your research is quanti, you need to ask yourself, what is my research design? So there are different research design that you can use. No? For example, if you are looking on descriptive research design, if the purpose is to describe the characteristics or behavior of a particular population or phenomenon, you can just use descriptive research design. So what are the methods that you can use? It could be survey, observational studies, and even case studies. Second is correlational research design. If the purpose is to examine the relationship between two or more variables without manipulating them. So you will be using statistical techniques such as the Pearson correlation to measure the strength and direction of relationship. Third is experimental design. So in experimental research design, the method should be random assignment to control an experimental group. So the purpose of this is to establish a cause and effect relationship between variables by manipulating one or more independent variables or observing the effects of dependent variable. Fourth is quasi-experimental research design. If the purpose is to know the similarity, no, to experimental design, or it lacks random assignment for participants to a group, making it less robust in establishing the cause and effect. So the method on how to do quasi-experimental is comparison of groups that are naturally occurring or pre-existing, often used when random assignment is not possible or ethical. Fifth is cross-sectional research design. You do that if the purpose is to observe or measure variables in a population at a single point in time. So what is the methods that you can use? Survey, questionnaire, observational studies conducted at one point. So an example of that could be a snapshot survey of public opinion on a political issue conducted during an election period. Six is longitudinal research design. If the purpose is to study the same variables or subject over an extended period of time to observe changes or developments. Usual method includes repeated observation or measurement over time, such as in cohort study or panel studies. So an example of that could be a long-term study tracking the career progression of graduates from a particular university over 10 years. Seventh is comparative research design. If the purpose is to compare two or more groups of variables to identify differences and similarities. The method includes cross-sectional or longitudinal method that can be used to make comparison. And the example includes comparing the test scores of students from different teaching methods to determine which is more effective. 8. Research design on quantitative is causal comparative or ex post facto research design. We do this if we want to explore the cause and effect relationship by comparing groups that differ on a variable of interest without manipulating the independent variable. So the methods that are being used is analysis of existing groups based on a specific criterion, example, the past behavior, characteristics, and comparison of outcomes. A good example of that is comparing the academic performance of students who attended public versus private school and to see the effect of school type on performance. Ninth, research design is meta-analysis. Meta-analysis is used to statistically combine the result of multiple studies on the same topic to identify the overall trends or effects. The methods include systematic review of literature and statistical techniques to synthesize findings. A good example of that is a meta-analysis of studies examining the effects of exercise on mental health outcomes. And third is survey research design. If the purpose is to collect data from a large population or sample to generalize findings, the methods include questionnaire, face-to-face interview, online survey, telephone interview. An example of that will be a national survey to assess consumer satisfaction with a particular brand. So now that I have described and discussed what are the different research design, so after identifying that your method is quanti, you need to select what research design you have to choose. So from the 10 list, you just choose one. So before I proceed to qualitative research method or design, what are the common misconceptions on quantitative research? What then we do if we want to look at both breadth and depth, or both causality and meaning? In this situation, it is best to use the so-called mixed method design, which use both qualitative and quantitative method. So these are some of the different misconceptions when it comes to quantitative method. And let us reveal it. For example, the data has to be in quantitative format to do quantitative research, doesn't it? So not necessarily. If data are naturally available as numbers, you can try and turn non-quantitative data, like the attitudes or opinion, into quantitative data by measuring them numerically, for example, by using questionnaire rating scale. Second, qualitative and quantitative research are incompatible, aren't they? Well, quantitative and qualitative research can be usually combined in mixed method design, which often produce a lot of useful information. Also, depending on your research question, you might, in one instance, want to use quantitative, and in the other instance, qualitative research. Another thing, the most important thing about quantitative research is statistics, isn't it? While the way in which you analyze your data matters, if you haven't designed your research well and collected the data in a valid and reliable way, you will not get valid results. However, sophisticated your analysis. So not at all. And finally, when we never explain things using quantitative research, to do that, we need to use qualitative methods. While qualitative research usually provides more depth and less breadth than quantitative research, a well-designed quantitative study will allow us not just to look at what happens, but also to provide an explanation of why it happens as well. And the key lies in your research design and what variables you collect. So the answer would be that is not strictly true. So let's proceed to qualitative research design. So the first research design I want to share with you is ethnography. By the way, qualitative research design are used to explore complex phenomena, understand experiences, and gain insight into social and human contexts. And here are the different types of qualitative research design. First is ethnography. If the purpose is to study cultures and communities in their natural environment by immersing in the participants' world, ethnography is the best design for you. The method is you include participant observation, field notes, interview, and immersion in the community or culture being studied. A good example of that is living in a remote village to study a cultural practices and social structure of its inhabitants. Second is phenomenology. You do phenomenology to explore and describe the lived experiences of individuals regarding a particular phenomenon. So what are the methods that you can use? It could be in-depth interview, reflective journal, and analysis of personal narratives to understand the essence of the experience. An example of that will be interviewing individuals who have experienced grief to understand the commonalities of their emotional journeys. Third is grounded theory. If the purpose is to develop a theory based on the data collected from participants, grounded in the actual experiences of those studied. So what are the common methods that you can use? It could be an iterative data collection and analysis with constant comparison and coding to identify emerging patterns and categories. A good example of that is developing a theory on how patients adapt to chronic illness based on interviews with multiple patients. Fourth is case study. You may use multiple data sources such as interview, observation, documents, and artifacts to gain a comprehensive understanding in case study. In case study, you conduct an in-depth analysis of a single case or few cases within their real-life context. A good example will be studying the implementation of new curriculum in one school to understand its impact on teachers and students. Fifth is narrative research. If the purpose is to explore the stories or life experiences of individuals, understanding how they construct meaning in their lives, narrative is a good research design. So the method includes collection and analysis of life stories, autobiographies, personal reflections, and oral histories. A good example would be analyzing a life story of a war veteran to understand the impact of military service on their identity. Six is action research. If you want to solve a specific problem or improve practice within a particular context, often involving collaboration with participants, action research is a good research design. So what is the methods that you can use? It could be cycles of planning, acting, observing, and reflecting with the active involvement of participants in the research process. So a good example will be collaborating with teachers to develop and test new teaching strategies to improve student engagement in the classroom. Seventh is content analysis. If the purpose is to systematically analyze the content of communication, such as text, media, or documents, to identify patterns, themes, or biases, content analysis is a good research design. So what is the method of doing content analysis? You include coding and categorizing data based on predetermined or emerging themes, often using software for large data sets. Example is analyzing newspaper articles to study the portrayal for climate change in media over a decade. And number 8 is discourse analysis. If the purpose is to study how language is used in text, conversation, and other forms of communication, focusing on social context and power dynamics, discourse analysis is a good research design. It includes analyzing spoken, written, or sign language in context, examining how the language shapes and is shaped by social interaction. An example would be studying political speeches to understand how leaders are used or use language to influence public opinion. Ninth is historical research. If the purpose is to explore the past events, processes, and trends to understand their causes and consequences, then historical research is a good research design. So, what are the methods that you can use? Examination of primary and secondary sources, such as documents, archives, artifacts, and oral histories. A good example is investigating the social and economic impacts of a historical event like the Great Depression on a particular community. 11. Participatory research. If the purpose is to engage the participants as co-researchers, focusing on empowering marginalized groups and producing practical outcomes, participatory research is a good research design. The methods includes collaborative methods like workshop, focus groups, and community meeting with a strong emphasis on participant involvement. An example will be working with the local community to identify and address environmental challenges in their area. 11th, and the last, is autoethnography. We use autoethnography if we want to explore the researcher's own experiences within a broader cultural, social, and political context. So the method includes reflective writing, storytelling, and personal narratives, combined with analysis of cultural and social phenomena. So a good example is a researcher reflecting on their experience of cultural assimilation after immigrating to a new country. So now I am done with qualitative research design. Let me now proceed to mixed method. For mixed method, let's start with convergent parallel design. We use convergent parallel design if we want to collect and even analyze quantitative and qualitative data separately, but simultaneously, then compare or merge the result to draw conclusion. So the usual process and the typical process is you collect quantitative data. Example of that is survey. And then we collect qualitative data. Example of that is interview at the same time. Then you analyze both data sets separately and then compare and combine result to see if they converge, diverge, or even complement each other. A good example of this is a study on patient satisfaction that uses a survey. First, quantitative, and follow-up interviews, qualitative, to understand both the overall satisfaction levels and the reason behind them. Second is explanatory sequential design. If the purpose is first collect and analyze quantitative data, then follow up with qualitative data collection to explain or elaborate on the quantitative findings. So the process first begin by conducting a quantitative phase. Example of that is a large-scale survey. After which, you analyze the quantitative data to identify key findings or patterns. Then you use these findings to design and conduct a qualitative phase, and that is an in-depth interviews. And then integrate the result using the qualitative data to explain the quantitative results. An example of that is a study measuring employees' engagement levels, quantitative, followed by interviews to explore the reason for high or low engagement, qualitative component. Next is exploratory sequential design. If the purpose is first collect and analyze qualitative data, then use the findings to inform the design of a quantitative phase. So you begin here with qualitative phase. Example of that is focus group discussion to explore a phenomenon. Then you use the insight from the qualitative data in order to develop a quantitative instrument. An example of that is a survey. Then you conduct a quantitative phase to test or generalize the findings. Then after that, you will integrate the result to form a comprehensive understanding. A good example is a study exploring teachers' perception of a new curriculum through interviews, qualitative, followed by a survey to quantify this perception across larger population. That is quantitative. Fourth is embedded design. Embedded is used to incorporate the qualitative data collection and analysis within a primarily quantitative design or vice versa in order to address different aspects of a research question. So the process first begins by designing a primary quantitative or qualitative study. Then afterwards, you embed a secondary qualitative or quantitative component within the primary study. Then you analyze both the component separately together to provide a fuller understanding. So an example is a clinical trial that primarily focuses on quantitative outcomes. Example of that is treatment efficacy. Both includes qualitative interviews to understand patient experiences during the trials. Fifth is multi-phase design. Multi-phase design is being used to address a set of related research questions or objectives across multiple phases, combining both qualitative and quantitative approaches. So first, you conduct multiple phases of data collection and analysis, often with each phase building on the results of the previous one. Second, phases can alternate between qualitative and quantitative methods. And then third, you integrate the findings across all phases to address the overarching research question. Example, a long-term project on community health that starts with qualitative interviews to identify issues, followed by a quantitative survey to measure these issues, and the final phase of qualitative focus group discussion to develop the intervention. Six is transformative design. If the purpose is to conduct the research that explicitly explain to address a social justice or advocacy using a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods. So you start with theoretical framework that guides the research. Then you collect both the quanti and qualitative data to address issues related to marginalized groups or social change. And then you integrate and interpret the data within the context of transformative framework. So a good example is a study designed to improve educational outcomes for underrepresented students using both test score, quantitative, and students' narrative, qualitative, to inform policy recommendation. And finally, triangulation. Triangulation is used to use multiple methods or data sources to cross-validate findings and ensure the robustness of the results. So the process happens by collecting the data from multiple sources or use multiple methods, like, for example, qualitative and quantitative data. Then you analyze and compare the data to see if they corroborate or contrast with each other. Then you use the combined findings to draw more reliable conclusion. An example is a study on the effectiveness of a training program that uses survey, interviews, and observation to cross-check the results. So after identifying the major type of research, you decide what kind of design to choose. You will now proceed to the research setting. So what do we include in the research setting? Number one, in this section, you should describe the environment or context where your research will take place. And this includes provision for geographical location, institution or organization, demographics, physical or social environment, and reason for choosing the locale. So number one is geographical location. What do you include here? You describe the specific location where the study will be conducted. This could be a particular city, a region, country, or institution. It includes relevant geographical details such as an urban or rural setting. Second is institutional or organization. If your research is being conducted within a specific organization, school, hospital, community, or other setting, you describe the institution and its relevance to your study. Third is demographics. In demographics, you provide information about the population or group you are studying within the location. And this might include details like the size of the population, the socioeconomic status, cultural background, age group, or other relevant characteristics. Fourth is physical or social environment. We describe the physical environment such as the classroom, clinics, community center, and the like, or social environment. Example of that is culture or social norm or economic condition in which the research takes place. And fifth is reason for choosing the locale. In this section, you explain why this particular setting was chosen for your research. And then you discuss how it is relevant to your study objectives and what makes it an appropriate location for gathering the data you need. So how does it look like? So if you are conducting a study on educational practices in rural school, this is an example. The study will take place in several rural schools located in the province of, you give the province name and the country. These schools are spread across and then the specific areas. Under institution or organization, you will write, the research will focus on public elementary school within the blank, the district name or the school district, which is characterized by you describe the school system, such as the number of schools and the students. Under demographics, this is an example. The population in this region primarily consists of, you mentioned the socioeconomic background, the ethnicity, the language spoken. And the student population in this school ranges from grades blank with ages blank. What about the physical and social environment? This school operate in a rural environment where access to resources and technology may be limited. The community values education but faces challenges such as, and then you mentioned the challenges like poverty, lack of infrastructure, so on and so forth. And the reason for choosing the locale. This location was chosen because it presents a unique opportunity to study, and then you specify the aspect, the impact of the resource limitation on teaching methods, and then understanding these dynamics and help in developing strategies to improve educational outcomes in a similar setting. So done with the research setting and locale. What is the next section in your methods, materials, and methods? That is the participants of the study. In the participant of the study section, you should provide detailed information about the individuals or groups who will be involved in your research. This section typically includes the following. So I'll just mute the microphone. I'll just drink water. Just hold on. Let's continue. So what is included in the participants of the study? Number one, population. When you talk about population, you are describing the broader population from which your sample will be drawn. It includes relevant characteristics such as the age, the gender, ethnicity, educational level, socioeconomic status, or other attributes that are pertinent to your study. So an example is the population. I will give you an example later, no? Like the population of the study includes all high school teachers in an urban public school in, you have to give the city or the region. In sample size, you indicate the number of participants you intend to include in your study. You mention whether this is a fixed number or an estimated figure. In sampling technique, you explain the method you will use to select your participants. Common sampling techniques include random sampling, purposive sampling, convenience sampling, stratified sampling. Another is inclusion criteria. In inclusion criteria, you specify the criteria that participants must meet to be included in the study. And these could be based on factors like age, profession, experience, or other relevant characteristics. You also include, under participants of the study, your exclusion criteria. Here you mention any characteristic that would disqualify someone from participating in your study. You also include the recruitment process, where you describe how will you identify and recruit participants. And this might include reaching out to schools, community, organization, advertisement, and other means. And finally, ethical consideration. Here, you briefly mention how will you ensure the ethical treatment of participants, including obtaining informed consent and ensuring confidentiality. So let's take a look at an example. So how do we write it? Example, for the population, the study will focus on high school teachers working in public school within urban areas of blank. You give the city and the region. In the sample size, a total of 100 teachers will be selected to participate in the study. In sampling techniques, stratified random sampling will be employed to ensure that participants represent different grade levels and subjects taught. Inclusion criteria. Participants must be full-time high school teachers with a minimum of 3 years of teaching experience. Exclusion criteria. Teachers currently on leave with less than 3 years of experience will be excluded. Recruitment process. Teachers will be recruited through school administrators who will disseminate information about the study and facilitate the collection of consent forms. And ethical consideration. Informed consent will be obtained from all participants and their confidentiality will be maintained throughout the study. So that's the end of participants of the study select section. Let's now proceed to sample size and sampling technique. Part of your materials and method is sample size and sampling technique. The sample size is the number of participants or observation included in a study. It represents a subset of a larger population that are being studied, and the sample size should be large enough to provide a statistically reliable result, but also feasible given the research context. Example of that is time and resources. So what are included in sample size and sampling techniques? There are 3 things: its importance, the determining sample size, and the sampling technique. Under importance, you need to include the statistical power. Remember, a larger sample size generally increases the statistical power of a study, making it more likely to detect a significant effect if one exists. Second is representativeness. The sample size affects how well the sample represents a broader population. A sample that is too small may not accurately reflect the population's characteristics, leading to biased results. And precision. Larger sample size allow for more precise estimates of population's parameter. Example of that is the means and the proportion. Second is determining sample size. You need to remember the purpose of your study. If the purpose of the study is to explore studies that may use smaller samples, while studies aiming for a precise estimate may require larger sample. So for the population size, for smaller population, the sample may constitute a larger proportion of the population. In the area of margin of error, a smaller margin of error or a range within which the true population parameter expected to fall typically requires a larger sample. And fourth, confidence level. Higher confidence level, example of that is 95%, require larger samples to ensure that the sample accurately reflect the population. And third is sampling technique. A sampling technique is the method used to select individuals or observation for inclusion in the sample. It determines how participants are chosen from the population. So there are different types of sampling technique. First is probability sampling, and the other one is non-probability sampling. So under probability sampling, every member of the population has a non-zero chance of being selected. And this type of sampling is more likely to produce a representative sample. It could be simple random sampling where each member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. For example, drawing the names from a hat. No? Second is a stratified sampling wherein the population is divided into subgroups or called strata based on the specific characteristics. Example of that is age, gender, and the participants are randomly selected from each stratum. Third is systematic sampling. Every nth member of the population is selected after a random start. For example, selecting every 10th person on a list. And then fourth is cluster sampling. The population is divided into cluster. Example of that is geographical areas, and the entire clusters are randomly selected for the sample. The second type of sampling technique is non-probability sampling. Here, not every member of the population has a known or equal chance of being selected, and this could lead or can lead to bias, but often more practical. There are four examples of non-probability sampling. Convenience sampling, where participants are selected based on availability or ease of access. For example, surveying people who walk by in a public place. Second is purposive sampling, wherein participants are selected based on specific criteria or characteristics relevant to the study. Third is snowball sampling, where existing participants recruit future participants among their acquaintances and useful in studies of hard-to-reach population. And fourth is quota sampling. In quota sampling, the population is divided into groups, and a certain number of participants are created or selected from each group in order to meet the quota, similar to stratified sampling, but not random. And third is choosing a sampling technique. So when you are choosing a sampling technique, you need to remember the following. You need to ensure that you are sure of your goal, your resources and time, your population characteristics. So done with sampling. Another subcomponent of your methods and material is institutional ethics review. So in an institutional ethics review section, you should provide information about the ethical approval process that you underwent. And this section typically includes the following: the ethics review board approval, wherein you indicate whether your study was reviewed and approved by institutional review board or ethics committee. So in order for you to include that, you need to include the name of the institution, the ethics review board, the date of approval, reference or approval number if applicable. So second is informed consent. In informed consent, you include the procedure that used to obtain the informed consent from your participants. So the details includes the study purpose, the procedure, and the risks and benefits. Here, you assure that the participants is voluntarily and the participants can withdraw at any time without penalty. You describe how the consent was documented. An example is provided on the screen. Third is confidentiality. Here, you outline how you ensure the confidentiality and privacy of your participant data. And the details include the methods of anonymizing or pseudonymizing data, how the data will be stored securely, and who will have access to it, and the duration to which the data will be retained. And risks and benefits. Under risks and benefits, you mention any potential risks to participants and how they were mitigated, as well as any potential benefits of participating in the study. So you include here any physical, psychological, or social risks, some steps to take to minimize this risk, and possible benefits to participants or society. An example is given on the screen. Fifth is conflict of interest. Here you disclose any potential conflicts of interest and how they were managed. An example of that is any financial or personal relationship that could influence the research. And six is compliance. Under compliance, you affirm that your study complies with relevant ethical guidelines and standard as those set by your institutional research board. And you mention here the ethical principle that adhere to, such as respect per person, beneficence, and justice. So this is an example on how we write an institutional ethics review section. So I have this example also in your worksheet to be distributed by the organizer. Okay. And then after that is data collection. Under data collection, you includes your objective, and the objective of this data collection is to evaluate the effectiveness of the new example teaching method on students' performance in high school mathematics. No? So you describe the objective. And then methodology, you give here how the data will be collected. For example, in the example I have given you on new teaching method, it could be the data will be collected using combination of survey, standardized test score, and classroom observation. And then you also describe the tools and instrument. Like, will you be using survey, a structured questionnaire, a test score, the scores from standardized mathematics tests, and observation, a checklist for observing classroom interaction and teaching effectiveness. And you also include data points, sample size, procedures, no? And examples also given on the screen. And finally, you discuss your analysis. Now, in the data analysis section, you outline how will you process and interpret the data being collected to answer the research question. So you include an overview, your data preparation, your statistical method, how the qualitative will be analyzed, how the quantitative will be analyzed, and your data interpretation, if you use software tool, and the result of your presentation. You also include the limitation and your conclusion. So for this session, you will be doing the methods part or the materials and method section of your article. So that is the end of session 3.